And starting us off, Crashed Memories. This creepypasta is about a gamer named Corey who felt nostalgic and plugged in his old PS1 console for kicks. Now digging through his old games, he came across Crash Bandicoot 2, a game that he and his brother had played together when they were young. So he popped it in and began to play. His old save file was still there. He had left off at the 4th World Hub and jumped into the Hanging Out level. As he got into it, all of his happy memories flooded back to him. He was also impressed by how good he was at navigating the level, and couldn't for the life of him remember getting stuck on this level in the past. Perhaps it was all of the experience that he had clocked from playing a ceaseless amount of MMOs over the years that made him better at Crash 2. The next level, Diggin' It, didn't bring about the same kind of bliss. It was glitchier than he recalled. Textures seemed to be missing, characters looked discolored, and the enemies didn't do anything. They didn't react. He beat the level and moved on to the next, Cold Hard Crash. This was even stranger. The snow in the level was grayish red, the ice was dark red, and the enemies looked downright demonic. Corey paused the game to send a message to his brother asking if the game was a bootleg version, if he could remember. His brother said it wasn't and that he had never touched the game since they last played it years and years ago. Corey continued to play, grinding his way through the level, only to reach the bonus area. But the bonus area was different. It brought him back into the warp room. Crash had completely disappeared and the game was now in first person. Cortex appeared and began to speak to him. "Surprised to see me, Corey?" he asked. Corey freaked out a little. How could the game know his name? "You haven't forgotten us, have you?" Cortex asked. Corey didn't know what to do. He spoke aloud, responding, "No, I..." Immediately he was cut off by Cortex screaming the word lies. Cortex asked him if he wanted to see what he caused by not completing the game. Moving aside, Cortex revealed Coco crying with a dark ring around her neck. Then Corey saw another horrific image. Crash was carrying Tiny Tiger's legs in his hands, wearing Ripperoo's straitjacket covered in blood. Crash looked up at him, staring Corey in the eye and said, "You broke the game, Corey. You broke the game." The screen then turned to static. Moving on to our next creepypasta, The Cheat Code. This creepypasta comes from Enderkate 4. The story begins with the narrator receiving a PS2 as a gift. Searching for old games to play at their local Goodwill, they managed to find a copy of Crash Bandicoot 2. While they could play the game, the one downside was that because it was a PS1 game, it needed a PS1 memory card in order to save. So, understanding that they'd have to give it a go in one sit down, they looked online to see if there were any cheat codes that could help them speed up the game. While looking, they found one code which was titled A Series of Numbers, and was a really short cheat to input. After googling it, they found nothing online about it, so they figured they would just give it a shot anyway. It took the narrator to the polar bear level, but everything was all wrong. The snow was covered in blood, the music was distorted, the polar bear ran with a limp and collapsed, sending Crash into a bunch of nitro boxes. Crash exploded, little bloody pieces going everywhere. Disgusted, the player went back to the website that they got the cheat from, but couldn't find the code anywhere. There was no record of it. They emailed their friend who was an expert when it came to cheat codes and asked about whether they knew what this code was. Frustrated, the player turned the game back on. Strangely enough, the game, despite not having the memory card, began right where the player had left off. And what did they see? The word death written in blood in the snow. They panicked and pulled out the power cord from their TV. To their horror, the word was still burnt into the television screen. That's when they saw that their friend had replied, asking if it was the very same exact code that they had used. The player asked why. The friend said that back when the game was being developed, a man who used to work for the developers on the game's cheat codes was fired for creating morbid cheats and secretly placing them into the games. That was the one code that was never taken out. To this day, the word death is still burnt into the player's TV screen. Next up, we have the beta level. Marcus James Gillian lived in a small town. He always felt that there wasn't much to do, so he spent most of his downtime playing on his PlayStation, the original PS1. He loved classic games, but his favorite by far was Crash Bandicoot. When he went to school, he would always brag to his peers about how pro he was at the game, how he beat Cortex, and how he had a high score, you name it. A friend of his, the author of this creepypasta, visited him one weekend and hopped on his computer as he was busy gaming away on his PlayStation. The author found himself on YouTube with Marcus's account logged in. He noticed that he had a private message. Being nosy, the author clicked on it just to see. It read, "Dear Crash Fan 23451, I heard you like Crash Bandicoot, so I thought I'd give you a free copy of the Crash Bandicoot beta. Being the fan you are, you've probably already played the betas, but this one is a lot different. Me and my friends have modified it a bit. But be warned, there's something in the game. We couldn't remove it or figure out what it was. Signed, Joe3556HD." The author called over Marcus, who paused his game and read the message. Immediately, he shoved the author out of the way and grabbed his computer's mouse. Within minutes, he had downloaded the beta game using a PSX emulator. It played out very much like the Crash beta that the author had seen Marcus play before. After a few hours of watching, the author passed out in the armchair in Marcus's room. He vaguely remembered Marcus nudging him awake, saying something about a new island, something unheard of in the game. Rubbing his eyes, the author told him to go ahead and select it. That's when the screen turned red, and next thing they knew, the game brought them to a grassy level that looked similar to the first level in Crash Bandicoot 2. The loading text was replaced with the word hell. As they entered the level, they noticed something very very unsettling. All of the birds, turtles, etc. all had slit throats, and were either hanging from trees or lying on the ground. Crash wasn't in third-person perspective. The game had put him in first-person POV. A cutscene began to play out of nowhere. Coco was there, a character who would not appear until Crash 2. The POV walked up to her and the two saw Crash extend his arms and begin to strangle her to death. The author ran out of Marcus's house in fear. The next day, Marcus did not show up to school. The author would later find out that Marcus was found in his bedroom with his throat slashed. And finally, last but not least, Crash EXE. Crash EXE is a riff of the famous Sonic EXE creepypasta. The story follows a gamer who gets a mysterious disc with the words Crash Bandicoot.exe written on it in marker. They decide to pop it into their old PlayStation and give it a go. But shortly after they start playing, they realize something isn't right. The game is constantly interrupted by loud static, appearing at random intervals, scaring the crap out of the player. Despite this, they continue to play. As they make their way through the levels, they spot Crash waiting for them at the end of the course. The screen cuts to black as they approach this other Crash, and on the level screen a title appears that reads, "Do you not repent?" The static reappears. The player continues on to the next level and the same thing happens again. They see another Crash in the distance, but this time when they reach him, they see that he doesn't have a face. The level screen reappears, it's now entirely red, and the text appears with it says, "I watch you every night." Terrifying images of Crash then appear, and the faceless Crash consumes the player's character, sucking its face off. Eventually the game turns to static and screams pour out of the audio.
Alright, first of all, cards on the table. I really like Crash Bandicoot. I've definitely played more Crash than Sonic, and I think his games are the bomb. So before you start going, what's the point of watching this? Top 10 Gaming loves Sonic, Ron will be biased. Cool your jets. We'll look at their stories, their powers, and then we'll see what's up. Let's start with Sonic. If you've been following the channel for a while, chances are you already know more about Sonic than you'll ever need to know, but for the newbies out there and those who just want to reminisce, let's talk about the fastest thing alive. Sonic wasn't always the blue blur we know today. As we learned in Sonic the Comic, Sonic once looked more normal, all brown and spindly. I mean, he still walked on 2 feet and talked, so he wasn't quite a normal hedgehog, but you know what I mean. One day, Sonic went into the lab of Dr. Ovi Kintobor. Yes, that's Ivo and Robotnik spelled backwards. The two became friends and Sonic was given power sneakers that increased his speed. However, while Sonic was having his speed tested in the kinetic gyroscope, he broke the speed of sound, which caused his quills to fuse together and turn blue. Sadly, Kintobor had his own accident, but this time the results weren't quite so good. The day after Sonic's transformation, Kintobor tripped and combined the evil in the Chaos Emeralds with a rotten egg to turn himself into Dr. Robotnik, aka Eggman. Yeah, it's not exactly Dickens. In terms of powers, I think most of you can already guess what I'm gonna say. He fast. Like, really fast. His speed varies throughout the games and comics, but he can consistently run faster than the speed of sound. He can use his speed to run quickly, hit hard and fast, and use a number of cool attacks, like a spin dash and homing attack. He can also power himself up further to become Supersonic, gaining access to a bunch of Chaos abilities, but that would make him way too OP in this fight, so we'll leave that out for now. Moving on to Crash Bandicoot, his origin is strangely similar to Sonic's. Crash was once a regular Bandicoot, but one day he was captured by Doctors Neo Cortex and Nitrous Brio. Using their Evolvo Ray, they managed to soup Crash up into the smarter and more humanoid form we all know and love. While he was in captivity, he met and fell in love with another Bandicoot named Tawna. However, when the baddies tried to use the incomplete Cortex Vortex on him to turn him evil, it didn't work, and he managed to escape. He eventually found a witch doctor mask, the much-loved Aku Aku, who helped him out on the quest to stop Cortex. Thanks to the Evolvo Ray, Crash has a number of improved abilities, and he improves further on them as he progresses through each game. And for the purposes of this video, we'll assume he has access to all such abilities. Physically, he has enhanced strength, speed, reflexes, and durability. He's also very limber, able to contort himself into various positions. He's also great with the yo-yo, but spoiler alert, that won't come into play in this fight. Sorry. In terms of abilities, Crash can do a fair bit. First and foremost, of course, is his spin. Crash can spin around quickly to kill enemies and break crates. This is his main attack and will be vital in this battle against the speedy Sonic. He can also double jump, which is basically spitting on the laws of physics. Furthermore, he's believed to be an expert at hand-to-hand combat, even though he generally just spins around. He has shown the ability to walk on walls, he's immune to mind control, and can do a big ol' belly flop to squash his enemies. Alright, now we know our combatants, it's time for the battle. The moment Crash sees Sonic, he starts spinning. He knows that the hedgehog is way too quick for him to react in time, so he needs to keep the spin going to stay safe. But after a while, he starts to get tired. He slows down and eventually stops, hoping there wouldn't be a hedgehog waiting for him. Crash looks around, breathing heavily, but he doesn't see Sonic anywhere. But just as he decides he's safe, a voice comes from behind him. "Oh hey, you're done!" Crash whips around. Wow! and sees Sonic chilling on a nearby rock, chowing down on a chili dog. Turns out when Crash started spinning, Sonic just went for a snack, knowing the Bandicoot will be out of energy soon. Now, with Crash out of gas and Sonic full of it thanks to his chili cheese dog, the fight is one-sided. Sonic runs up to Crash flinches away, but no hit comes. He opens his eyes, only to have Sonic hawk his nose like Mr. Miyagi. Sonic wins by humiliation. Well, there we have it. As much as I love the Crash games, especially Warped, Crash just couldn't keep up with Sonic. He could hold him off for a bit with his spinning, but he can't do that forever. Sonic is just far too good at going fast. But hey, what do I know? Number 10. Sonic came first. This might sound like a childish point to make, but it's pretty significant. After Mario took the world by storm, Sonic came in and tried to change the game, and as far as I'm concerned, he did. But when Crash came onto the scene, he didn't really add many new mechanics to things. It was just created to give Sony their own mascot to compete with Sega's Sonic and Nintendo's Mario. Sonic coming sooner allowed it to tap a market that hadn't really been hit by Mario, and by the time Crash arrived, there wasn't much more to add. Kinda like being the third person in your class to do a presentation on the Venus flytrap. It's still good, and there are some unique parts, but it's already been done. Number 9. Less generic platforming. While both games did start as a platformer, Sonic has diversified his portfolio quite a bit. The world has opened up, more avenues are being explored, and while there's still definitely a platformy vibe, it's pretty different. Crash hasn't done this so much. The platformer games are still relatively simple and generic. Some people prefer this about Crash, enjoying the simplicity, and I can totally understand that. But if you're looking for a more complex challenge, Sonic's probably the way to go. Number 8. More games. This might sound like a shallow comparison, but it is pretty important to the more avid gamers. Sonic has dozens of games to choose from with all sorts of different playstyles. Crash definitely went through a spurt of games in the early 2000s, but not nearly enough to overtake Sonic. The huge number and diversity of Sonic games gives players a tremendous amount of selection. This is kinda cheating since Sonic came out 5 years before Crash, but even taking that into account, Sonic still comes out on top. Number 7. More media. Here's one that comes up on a lot of these lists, but is hugely relevant to this one. Crash Bandicoot has virtually no media outside of the games, barring the odd comic or web short. Sonic, on the other hand, has shows, comics, even a movie. There's a ton for Sonic fans to watch and read, while Crash fans are out of luck. There was actually supposed to be a Crash TV show back in '96, but it got canned, which sucks because based on the ad, it actually looked pretty good. Number 6. Fleshed out cast of characters. This is one that's come up a few times, but in this case, it's especially apparent. Sonic has a multitude of friends, each with their own neat attribute. Crash has Coco and Aku Aku and the odd little tiger, but it's not even close. Just look at Crash Bash. There are so few known characters that they just have to fill it with villains. One could argue that having fewer central characters makes for a more streamlined experience, but the large Sonic cast leaves room for personal preference, not to mention more interesting storylines. Speaking of which, number 5. Sonic has more interesting storylines. Let's be real, neither of these franchises are exactly the most story focused. They're platformers for the most part, and the name of the game there is action. The story is generally secondary. But Sonic games tend to put a fair bit more work into the story, with people being kidnapped and injured and even killed sometimes. Crash tends to be more, hey, beat a bunch of levels, then you can get to the boss and save the day, which is still fun, but less creative. Number 4. Sonic hides the fact that he copied Mario slightly better. Let's face it, neither Sonic nor Crash would be a thing if it weren't for Mario. That's fine, there's nothing wrong with taking inspiration from past games, and the platformer genre is a fun one. Crash kinda just tags along behind Mario. Oh, you have a platformer? Here, I'll make a platformer. Oh cool, a racing game? Crash Team Racing. Totally my original idea. Oh nice, Mario Party's pretty nifty, time for Crash Bash! Sonic doesn't do this so much. Sure, there are a few instances of it, but it's much less chronologically suspicious than the Crash games. Number 3. He didn't go on hiatus. Crash fans will definitely feel the pain in this one, I sure do. After being a pretty dominant force for years, the Crash team took a break from the games in 2011. Wasn't until 2016 that we got a taste of him, but it was only Skylanders. Then last year we got a new release, which was an updated release of the original games, which turned out to be awesome, but it's still lame to have nothing new. Sonic did not go in that direction. They kept pumping games out over the last decade. And while this may have led to some less than awesome games, at least the games were there. Number 2. Sonic can talk. One thing that separates Sonic from a lot of protagonists is that he talks quite a bit. Whether it's in-game or in cutscenes, he's one chatty hedgehog. Crash isn't so much with the talking. He prefers to just go whoa, 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 whoa. As funny as it may sound, you don't really get to know the guy just listening to his grunts. Yes, I know Crash can talk in Skylanders, but as far as I'm concerned, that doesn't count. It's not my Crash.
Islands and about to free my friend Tawna from the...
Number 1. Better music. This point's almost a cheat, just because Sonic games have such great music that it's hard to compete. Maybe F-Zero could give it a run for its money, but it'd be close. But it's true, the music in Sonic is way better than that of Crash. The Crash tunes are fine, but it's more just generic platformy songs than the cool guitar stuff we get from Sonic. Easy win for Sonic here.